There is a place far beyond the reaches of most maps, off the jagged coastline of Nova Scotia, where the wind never sleeps and the sea is always waiting. They call it Widow's Reach. A lonely, weather-beaten lighthouse stands there, lashed by waves and storms. It was built in 1886 after a series of shipwrecks in the region, but sailors claim it did little to help. Instead of saving ships, they said the light drew them closer to the rocks, as if possessed by something ancient and cruel. Over the years, more than 15 lighthouse keepers had taken up residence at Widow's Reach. Only 5 returned, and none of them ever spoke of what they saw. In the fall of 1993, a man named Alan Merrick accepted a 6-week contract to serve as the temporary keeper. He was a man in search of silence, a retired naval officer, recently divorced, withdrawn from the world. The isolation of Widow's Reach seemed perfect. He was dropped off by a local fisherman who refused to dock, leaving Merrick to wade ashore with his pack. The fisherman muttered something as he turned the boat around, something about the hour of the sea, and never looking into the light after midnight. Merrick didn't listen. He didn't believe in ghost stories. Not then. The first few nights were peaceful. Cold, yes, and unnervingly quiet, but peaceful. Alan kept a journal. His entries were short, descriptions of wind patterns, tides, mechanical upkeep of the beacon. But on the 5th night, things changed. At precisely 3:17 a.m., Alan was woken by a sudden whine from the tower above. He climbed the narrow iron staircase to investigate. The beacon was still off. He hadn't activated the rotation mechanism. And yet, the lens was spinning. Slowly. Smoothly. Powered by nothing. He stood in the lantern room, watching it turn. The glass panes reflected odd shapes, shadowed figures moving between the beams. He blinked. They vanished. When he turned to leave, he found an old, corroded oil lamp sitting in the middle of the room. He hadn't brought one. It hadn't been there before. He picked it up, and the chill that ran through his body felt like the sea itself had touched his spine. Over the next nights, Alan heard footsteps pacing the stairs, slow and heavy. But every time he looked, the tower was empty. On the 10th night, he awoke to a sound like distant weeping. It came from inside the walls. He searched every inch of the keeper's quarters, every crawl space. Nothing. That night, he made a note in his journal. There is someone else here. Or something. I can feel it watching. He tried the radio. Static. Then a single word. Stay. That same night, he saw something out the window. A figure in an old maritime uniform, soaked and rotting, standing by the rocks, staring up at the lighthouse. He rushed outside, shouting, but the figure was gone. He found only footprints, leading into the sea. Alan tried to leave. He prepared an emergency flare, packed a dry bag, and hiked down the slope toward the sea. But the boat was gone. No sign of the fisherman. No radio contact. Just the light, now rotating every night at 3:17 a.m., whether he willed it or not. And the dreams began. He dreamed of drowning. Not in water, but in blackness. He would wake up choking, gasping, as if pulled from deep below the waves. Once, he woke standing at the edge of the lantern room, his hand on the lens, the lights spinning furiously. He didn't remember getting up there. The journal entries grew erratic. It speaks when the waves crashed twice. The keeper never left. I saw my face in the water, but it wasn't mine. By week 4, Alan had stopped writing. He wandered the halls muttering to himself. The food spoiled in the pantry, the oil lamp always burned, and the figure on the rocks came closer each night. On the 37th night, the light activated early. Alan stood frozen in the lantern room as the lens glowed blood red. Behind him, reflected in the glass, was the other keeper. The dead one. Pale, bloated, eyes wide with grief. He turned, and no one was there. But the staircase behind him was wet. On the final night, the storm came. Furious waves slammed the tower. The wind roared like 1,000 screams. And the light spun faster than it ever had before, bathing the rocks and sky in a sickly yellow glow. The journal was found later, soaked but legible. The last entry read, "He wants me to take his place. I've seen the light. I understand now." Alan Merrick was never seen again. The fisherman returned weeks later. The lighthouse was empty, the flare untouched. But every night since, the beam still rotates, always starting at 3:17. Locals say the new keeper never came by boat. He came from the sea. And sometimes, if you listen on a windless night, you'll hear the footsteps climbing the tower. Slowly, always getting closer. On the western coast of Scotland, near the Isle of Skye, there's a forgotten patch of sea called Drowning Man's Bay, a place mariners avoid, not because of treacherous currents or jagged rocks, but because of the stories. The sea there doesn't just hate, it remembers. Built on a narrow sea stack nearly a mile offshore is Eilean Mor Lighthouse, a rust-streaked tower rising from the black waves like a broken tooth. Its foundations vanish below the surface, anchoring into something older than the rock itself. The lighthouse had long been decommissioned, its light dark for decades, until it suddenly turned back on one winter night in 2004. No one knew why. No one had been stationed there in years, and no one could reach it. Laura Greaves, a 38-year-old marine surveyor, was hired to investigate. She specialized in structural inspections of remote locations, unmoved by legends or ghost tales. To her, a lighthouse was just iron and stone. Weathered. Predictable. She arrived with 2 crewmates aboard a rented trawler. The sea was calm. Unnaturally calm. As they approached Eilean Mor, the waves stilled and the wind seemed to pause, like the ocean itself was holding its breath. The lighthouse loomed ahead, tall, skeletal, covered in green algae and barnacles halfway up its sides. But the beacon was spinning. Greaves stared through binoculars. The light was too clean, too precise, too recent. They tied the boat to a rusted metal ring near the base and climbed the iron ladder onto the narrow platform. The door creaked open with surprising ease. Inside, the tower smelled of salt, mold, and something sour. Dead. The walls were slick with moisture, the spiral staircase slick with grime. Yet, every step echoed like it had been walked moments before. On the main level, Greaves found a desk. On it, a journal. The name scrawled in neat script. W. Halden, Keeper. 1902 to 1913. That was impossible. There hadn't been a living keeper on record after 1937. She flipped through the pages. They were dated as if written only weeks ago. The sea speaks at night. I have begun to understand its language. The door beneath the water opens when the bell rings. He is returning. I must keep the light on. It must always shine. Laura turned the page. The final entry was different, scribbled urgent. If the light stops, he rises. I've sealed the lower chamber. If someone comes, tell them, do not go below. Just then, a sound echoed through the tower. A clang, metal against metal. From below, Greaves and her team exchanged nervous glances. She wanted to leave, but protocol demanded a full structural survey, including the lower foundation, which supposedly no longer existed. They descended. Below the base level, behind a rusted generator, they found a metal hatch, covered in sea salt, bolted shut from the outside. Greaves hesitated, then opened it. The stairs led downward, far deeper than the sea level should have allowed. Cold air gusted up. The walls dripped seawater, yet the steps remained dry. At the bottom was a door carved from stone, embedded with a symbol none of them recognized. Something ancient, circular, tidal, pulsing. She touched it, and the beacon above flickered. Suddenly, the radio crackled with a voice. Not from her crew. Not human. The keeper is waiting. The stone door groaned. It was opening from the other side. Something moved beyond the threshold, massive, fluid, and wrong. Not quite flesh. Not quite shadow. Tentacles of darkness slithered along the floor. A face emerged, watery and hollow-eyed, yet unmistakably human. It was W. Halden, but he had no legs. His lower body twisted into strands of black seaweed and barnacle-covered flesh. He hovered in the air, dripping, pulsing. He spoke without moving his mouth. The sea gave me eternity. I only asked for peace. Laura tried to flee, but her legs refused. The very air held her. The creature drifted closer. The light is my prison. Will you tend it for me? She screamed. Darkness swallowed everything. She woke alone, on the deck of the trawler. It was drifting near shore, the lighthouse far behind, a small light still turning in the lantern room. Her crew was gone. No blood, no trace. Just soaked, empty clothes and a faint smell of brine. She reported what she could, but the lighthouse was unreachable again. Weather, they said. Equipment failure. No response to any future attempts. But every night, at exactly 2:44 a.m., the light begins to rotate. And Laura? She doesn't sleep anymore. Because she still hears the whisper. Keep the light burning. Keep the light burning. In the icy southern reaches of the Atlantic, just off the desolate coast of Patagonia, stands the San Telmo Lighthouse, a crumbling relic from the early 20th century. Perched on a cliff that seems to lean into the void, it has long been cut off from the mainland. The cliffs below it are jagged, the tides violent. It was abandoned in 1971 after a freak accident claimed the life of its final keeper. But the locals believe something far older than man resides beneath that cliff. Something that watches. Something that waits. And once a year, without fail, on the 18th of July, the signal room at San Telmo lights up and transmits a strange, untraceable frequency. A signal that should be impossible. In 2015, Diego Alvarez, a 29-year-old radio engineer and amateur cryptologist, decided to investigate. He shouldn't have. Diego had always been fascinated by unsolved broadcasts, number stations, lost Morse sequences, shortwave patterns that made no logical sense. He stumbled across the San Telmo signal one night at 3:06 a.m., a piercing, rhythmic transmission in a dead frequency range, followed by a series of coded clicks. It only lasted 5 minutes. He tracked it to the Argentine coast and uncovered whispers about the San Telmo Lighthouse, long abandoned, allegedly sealed, but still transmitting once a year. He arranged a permit, hired a fisherman, and made his way to the forgotten promontory. The boat wouldn't dock, so Diego went alone. The lighthouse stood like a corpse, its metal railing eaten by rust, the glass in its lantern shattered, windows dark and lifeless. Yet the door to the lower chamber was ajar. Inside, the air was thick, metallic. Diego stepped into the control room and found the signal terminal, a rusted console with cracked dials and corroded wiring. Dust covered everything except one thing. A reel-to-reel tape recorder. Clean, shiny, untouched by time. Next to it, a journal. It was filled with dates, identical entries, and the same forward phrase written over and over. The signal is alive. At 3:06 a.m., the signal began again. Diego watched the tape recorder spin, though it wasn't plugged in. The console lit up. The signal blasted from the broken speakers. But it wasn't code. Not this time. It was a voice. A woman's voice. Calm. Soft. Hollow. He is beneath the cliff. He listens. He remembers. Diego froze. The voice continued. We tried to warn you. Then a deep, wet thud echoed beneath the floor, something shifting, breathing, or waiting. The lights in the room flickered. Every dial turned to 0, and the air grew cold enough to frost his breath. Then he heard the knocking, from beneath the floorboards. Diego discovered a hatch behind the terminal, rusted shut, but shaking slightly. Against his instincts, he pried it open. A narrow tunnel spiraled downward, carved into bedrock. The walls were covered in symbols, nautical charts twisted into spirals, unintelligible glyphs, and etched drawings of the lighthouse with black smoke pouring from its beacon. The deeper he went, the more the sound changed. The signal was louder now, every beat like a heartbeat. And then, he saw it. A room. Stone walls. And in its center, a chair made of barnacle-covered steel facing a wall of strange machinery. Old switchboards. Rotating antennae. All active. All alive. And in that chair, someone was sitting. The figure was skeletal. Its skin stretched thin, Its eyes open, milky, and unmoving. Wires trailed from its head into the walls. A headset rested on its skull, fused by rust and time. As Diego approached, the room breathed. The machines pulsed. The signal changed again, turning into a sound like water rushing over glass. Then the figure turned its head, slowly. Mechanically. It looked at him. Not with eyes. With memory. And in his mind, Diego heard a single, overwhelming phrase. "Join the signal!" He screamed. He ran. Up through the tunnel, the light above now red, spinning like a siren. The lighthouse moaned with every gust of wind. When he burst outside, the cliffs were collapsing. Chunks of stone fell into the sea. The tide boiled below. He threw himself into the waves, swam for the boats still anchored nearby, and pulled himself aboard, gasping, shivering. The signal still played. In the sky. In his head. Weeks passed. The government denied the event. Claimed there was no signal. That the lighthouse was still sealed. But Diego knew. Because every night since, he heard it again. In static. In silence. In dreams. And one night, the reel-to-reel appeared on his desk. Still spinning. Still recording. And in the background, behind the whir of the tape, a voice whispered, "Your turn."